this is what we're trying to avoid. These are all actually flash floods. The top left is actually in Cornwall. We're not quite sure what that guy is doing in there. Possibly getting down, trying to get to the pub to watch the football. Bottom left is someone in Bolivia. Top right was in Nîmes in France. And if you look, you can actually see the driver and passengers are still in that bus. And I believe that those were amongst the casualties in that flood. Right, we'll see which buttons. Yes, good. Right. I was asked to end up with a single message to take away for you, to discuss. See, I started off with rather a lot of messages, and I've managed to distill it down later. But if you see, what are the things that historically we have learnt in the UK, very much influenced by experience in other countries? First of all, we don't have flood risk management plans anymore. We have all hazard plans. We need to think about all the hazards and have an adaptable plan which works for all of them. Secondly, emergency planning is a cooperative process, it's not a product. You should never have an emergency plan written by consultants. It should be written, prepared, discussed by the people who are going to have to do it. Because much of the importance of planning is actually building up the networks. So that when things happen, you know who knows what and you can know how to contact them. Flooding is not a state. I loathe plans of showing the 500-year flood extent. What's important about flooding is it's a process. It's a changing process. In the jargon in emergency planning in this country, they talk about dynamic risk assessment, which is just complicated words for saying things are changing the whole time. That's what you have to cope with and adapt to. Things that happen are not usually what you've planned for, although you probably should plan for the flood occurring on Christmas Eve or a national holiday. It always happens at the worst possible time. Evacuation planning, well, one of the bad things about evacuation planning we had and emergency planning in the UK, was putting police in charge. You tend to have the expectation that the public would stay where they were until they were told to do something, in which case they'd immediately do it without question. They ran into big problems when people said, well, why? What should I do? And people say, we'll tell you what to do, and then you do it. So we need to understand what are the factors operating on the people who we want to evacuate. And those you'll see later on. One of the most obvious things is that parents do not want to evacuate until they've collected their children. If there isn't enough time, you don't expect there to be enough time for this to happen, then you have to make sure that the parents are absolutely confident that their children will be evacuated from school and they don't have to worry about them, they just have to worry about themselves. We're always saying we should tell the public about what should happen. Well, we did have an emergency plan for London, a specialised plan, before the Thames Barrier was built, and when exercises were done to see how many people knew, it turned out not many people could recall any of the information that they'd received in the leaflets they were given. And of course, all of us are bombarded with far too much data, material, and do you read everything that comes through your door? Some of you are looking quite smug and are prepared to have an examination on what came through your door in the last 3 days. And if you get something which doesn't look terribly urgent, you may put it away and then, of course, you've lost it. So we want to try and inform people. They need to know something. Ideally, it would be best if they knew in advance what to do. But we're not really going to be able to do, for floods, what we learned to do in the case of fires. 30 odd years ago, I was involved in work on fires, and that was when the early studies were being done on the psychology of fires. And what was discovered then, if a fire alarm went off, nobody did anything. Because nobody wanted to be the only fool outside standing in the rain when it was when a false alarm. Except there was a gender difference. Men tend to go and look for the fire, which is not really what we wanted them to do. And it was found in houses that if there was a noise during the night and the woman woke up and said, "I think there's a fire," man sort of went, "Don't be silly," and then it's sufficiently nudged, would get up and go downstairs and look for it. And if you've got a fire inside a closed living room door and somebody opens the door, you suddenly got a flashover and the house is ablaze and the person who opened the door is dead. So there are gender differences. We need to understand people. What are the things operating on them? We need to prepare advice for those who are to evacuate. My local, I'm a smoker, and one of the great advantages of being a smoker is you get to meet lots of people, and one of the people I meet is the local emergency planning officer. And during the recent floods, we had groundwater flooding in London. The aquifer is usually 25 metres down, it came up to the surface. And she was, in the mutual aid, she was sent down there and told, go knock on doors, tell people they have 30 minutes to evacuate. And the thing everybody says, well, what should I do? What should I take with me? What should I do in the house? Should I turn off electricity, gas, water? Should I block the sink? Should I block the toilet because there's bubbles coming up? And then, because of the next point about it was the last but one, information provision and management, because this was being done in there, which nobody expected to flood. But no sooner had Sue been round giving a warning than another emergency planner came round and gave the same advice. So instead of people having 30 minutes to prepare, they spent 30 minutes being told they should evacuate. And when they were told, well, okay, we've come to collect you now, they said, but we haven't had any time to prepare. So pre-prepare advice. Communication is always a problem. I'm glad to say that this turns out not to be a problem. It's not just a problem in the UK, it's a problem everywhere. When the French did an emergency planning exercise for floods on the Meuse, let's get the French name, they had a problem with communication. Radios won't work, or you can't find where the people are. In the old days of landlines, the public immediately in a crisis will start talking to each other. So the landlines were always blocked. So you always needed some secret landlines to talk to the other important people, ones that the public didn't know. The same problem occurs with mobile phones. What we have in England now is, in the case of a designated emergency, only some users are allowed in. The general public can no longer connect on their mobile phones. Probably rather upsetting for them, but we don't care. This problem of information provision and management, you never know enough, and you don't know. It's always happening too much. So we need to try and work on this, and this is one of the reasons why you need to have a process of planning, and you must exercise frequently. Because exercises build up the network capacity to deal with the event which is not what you expected. But saying that, there are enormous differences between the UK and the Netherlands. Only 15% of England is at risk of flooding, and we have all sorts of floods. In 2007, what we discovered, we had most of our flooding, 60% of the properties that were flooded by what we call pluvial flooding, that is local rainfall. It wasn't the rivers overflowing or or from the sea. It was just local rainfall. And of course, the problem with local rainfall, if you've got pump systems, the first thing that goes out of action is your pumps. We have flash floods because we have enough small catchments. I've mentioned groundwater flooding as well. And really, the worst thing that can happen, an extreme flood in the UK is a minor flood. Equally, but on the other hand, in terms of management, we have catchments, you have deltas. You take whatever Germany gives you, basically. We have a difference in conceptualization as well, I would say. I mean, importantly, we don't have any fixed standards of defense. We're concerned very much how we're going to change and adapt the way we use land to cope with climate change. We don't compensate for losses either. And in general, our attitude, I mean, my view, correct me if I'm wrong, my view in the Netherlands, you say, right, we have what we hold, it must never flood. We start from the opposite position of saying, why should we protect this land? Is there any good reason? And one of the reasons, we can work out reasons to protect urban areas, but if we look at agricultural land, it's a good place for storing floodwater. Good quality agricultural land in England is worth about £4,000 a hectare. It costs about £5,000 to build a metre of dike. So we go, good place to store floodwater. And that's historically what we've done. We've never really protected agricultural land from flooding. We have provided with drainage so that we can, which protects from flooding during the growing season for a risk of up to about 1 in 10. That enables farmers to convert from low value uses to high value uses. There's differences in experience. Yeah, I know you've had industrial disasters, but our entire emergency response has been partly influenced by industry, but more particularly by terrorism. With the IRA, we had some very large-scale bombings causing billions of pounds worth of damage in each event. 7/7 caused about 50 deaths in London. That's what drives the whole of emergency planning in the UK. And we're lucky in floods that we've been able to ride off that because we have all hazard plans. Flooding is, however, a minor problem. What we should really be worrying about quite correctly is pandemics. The contingency planning for the UK for a next pandemic with an estimated chance of occurrence of 1 in 20 per year is we could have up to 750,000 deaths, 150,000 in London alone. And then environmentally, the chief scientist at the moment says after the flooding is his seventh highest priority, his top is bee decline because of the devastating effects on agriculture and the environment. And what nobody ever wants to talk about when we talk about that is actually the economic terms, the real disasters are financial. I don't think you can have a flood in the Netherlands which will cause as much damage to the economy as the financial crisis. See on the right-hand side, national income in the UK is 13% below it would have been if we continued at the rate it was prior to the financial crisis. Government debt has doubled. It's gone up by a minimum of 500 million. So let's worry about the big things and not spend too much time about the less important things. But what we're also saying is disasters are inevitable, so we better prepare to them and recover. We talk all the time about resilience. This is the circular disaster risk management diagram, which we all know and love, has been around for about 40 years. It inherently embeds this idea of having a multi-layered approach. You have strategies before the event, during the event, and after it. That's embedded in the UK in what we have local resilience forums. And I can't remember the name of the Dutch equivalent of protection zones or something or other. But London Resilience Forum has members from 140 different organisations. The utilities have to be in there, health service, as well as the emergency services. Mutual aid is also necessary. What we do, I think, is a bit different. If I want to be really cynical, I say, England, we like rivers. In the Netherlands, you like canals. So I really look at rivers in this country and I think, it looks like a canal. Oh. Wait, so this is what we expect rivers to look like. The two on the left are river bypass channels. The one on the top left is one done in the 1960s and was built basically as a canal, but has naturalized quite well. We expect, we have had people who have adamantly resisted the building of flood embankments, whether it's a wall or a dike, because they will say it will ruin their view, it will ruin the landscape. So evacuation isn't necessarily part of our flood risk management strategy. This is part, I showed this particular area because I was brought up on there, and at a point I can actually point on the map to where I was born and brought up. This is part of the Thames Estuary 2100 plan, which is, if you like, the Deltaprogramma equivalent in the UK. You see all the red areas, it's saying, which is the low-lying part. We can't do anything realistically to protect that or justify it. This is a resort area. That's for priority evacuation and refuge. Near to it, we're saying the strategy is building resistance. We try and keep the water out of the building. And beyond that, the orange areas are where we try and modify the buildings to minimize the damages that are done when it floods. We have had a change. Flood warnings 40 years ago were actually about, the recommendation was that you gave a flood warning so that people could do things to reduce losses. And then we expected them to go upstairs and wait for the flood to go away. You can see that tells you 1 minute. Right, okay, let us, this will be available as a PDF, and let me, I've done it rather more dramatically than I anticipated. Is that the one I was? I don't know where I was. Oh, we'll go back to Green Nijmegen. Okay, and let us go to, oh my God. Right, let me go to, therefore, to the takeaway message. My takeaway message, well, the point for talking about is, it's about how we learn. Where do we learn? How do we learn more effectively? And eventually, I rather hope something will happen. Yes, but now all right, let's do it the long way round. Oh yes, this is This on the right-hand side is Hamburg. This is how you should evacuate, in my opinion. You put signs up on your bus stop saying this is where you collect. So we have to learn. What we need to discover is how we can learn better and faster. Right. Thank you.